Welcome to ERBS University. Class is in session. ERBS is a mix between a MOBA and a Battle Royale, which isn't the conventional style of game, making it fairly complicated. But this is also one of the reasons why this game can be so much fun, because it's something new. Right now, the game has a pretty steep learning curve, which makes it kind of daunting for newer players when they're trying to learn the game. But by the end of this series, I hope to give you guys a better understanding of the game so you can go and get some of these wins. During this course, I'm aiming to teach you guys everything about builds, gameplay, character mastery, and mindset. These are the lecture topics that I currently have planned, but do keep in mind that some of these things may be subject to minor tweaks and changes. So for our first lecture topic, we're going to be talking about builds. Since this is a longer topic, I'm going to split it up into two parts. Welcome to Everything About Builds, Part 1, where we'll be learning how to finish our build quickly and consistently. By the end of this video, you should no longer feel the need to go complain on Reddit about how you got screwed over by bad RNG. Yes, there is RNG in this game, but trust me, RNG is not the reason why you only have your purple weapon by day 2. In this game, finishing your build is a skill that can distinguish a good player from an average player. But fear not, as it's a skill that can be easily learned. There are two aspects that you need to master when trying to improve your build times. There's your macro decisions, then there's your micro decisions. But what does macro and micro mean? Macro refers to the decisions that you make that pertain towards your overall gameplay. So in ERBS, your macro can be seen as your game plan. It deals with questions like, should I take this fight? Should I leave the zone? What zones am I going to next? As for micro, it's more specific and rigid because it deals with things that relate to your mechanics. So in ERBS, your micro can be seen as how well you do very specific tasks, such as, how well do you kite wick a line? How many seconds does it take you to loot your boxes? Do you have good inventory management? Obviously, for this lecture, we're going to be gearing macro and micro more towards build completion. So let's start with macro. Remember, for macro, we want to use all the information we can get to make informed gameplay choices. Alright, point number 1. Loading screen map. Before you even load into the game, you should pay attention to how many people are spawning in the zones that you plan on pathing through. I wouldn't worry too much about who's in your first to third zones, because normally if you're efficient and apply some of the strategies that we're going to talk about, then you should be able to find most of the items that you need. However, for your 4th and 5th zones, the amount of people that are spawning there is really important. Normally you'd get most of your total build components in your first couple zones, while you only need a small amount of items in your 4th and 5th zones. So what am I trying to say here? If there's a lot of people spawning in your 4th and 5th zones, then you might want to start thinking about where you can go instead. For example, if beach is my 5th zone and I need gemstones and pickaxes, but there is 4 people who spawn there, then I might want to consider going to pond or forest instead, because there's a higher chance for me to find my items there. Number 2, early game map. When you first spawn into the game, you get vision of everyone on the map for about 2 to 3 seconds. This is a really crucial piece of information that you can't ignore because it's going to determine how you're going to be looting your first zone. Make sure you pay extra attention to where people are spawning in your zone. Once you know where people are spawning, you want to try and path away from them. During the start of the game, each zone is ripe with loot, so there's no reason to contest other players for loot. So here I can see there's a magnet spawning towards the center of the building here. So I'm going to make sure that if I'm looting boxes, I'm going to loot these boxes around here. I'm going to make sure I go down towards here and then maybe I loot back up. Just because I know since Magnus is in the center building, he's probably going to loot these boxes around here. Maybe he goes to this center building, but if he does that, I can get this building faster than he can, so there's no issues. Alright, so here we can see Soul is in this main building right here. So I essentially have this entire area to myself, so I can loot around here, I can go loot down here, and then I can obviously go loot this area here. And by then, with these amount of boxes, I should have already found my items and be out of my first zone. So again, I'm trying to make sure you guys understand that you shouldn't be fighting each other for loot this early in the game. Just walk away from them, give up maybe the less efficient routing, because you'll find your items anyways. Number 3, zone to zone movement. You should always be thinking about how you're going to get to your next zone. When you first enter a zone, you should make sure that you're looting in the direction that you plan on going. Backtracking is a huge waste of time early on in the game, so you never want to find yourself in a scenario where you're walking through an area that you've already looted. So here, if I'm by myself in temple, then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure I check these boxes, and I'm gonna be conscious of my passing so that when I have most of my items, I should be towards the nearest zone that I want to go. In this case, I'm going next to the teleporter just because I know my second zone is school, so I need to teleport out. So I'll be making sure to check all these boxes around me as I go. Similarly for school, I want to be, again, really conscious of my pathing. So since I want to check as many boxes as I can before I leave, I may make sure to path up here. Maybe I go through here, loot these boxes, check a couple boxes up here. I've gone too far. Maybe I path down because I need to make sure that I'm actually heading towards forest. I check these boxes again, check this box when I leave. And when I'm done, I should be right at the speed gate to forest. So let's say I spawn in this section of school and I somehow find myself looting all the way up to this main building. At this point, in order to get to forest in a reasonable time, I'm going to have to backtrack all this way so that I can get there. I guess my other option here is to go to the alley teleporter. But again, it's wasting a lot of time that I could be spending in my third zone. Number 4. When to leave. There isn't a specific amount of time that you should spend in each zone because it really depends on the build. But you should be thinking about when you can and when you should leave a zone. It's super crucial that you don't waste a lot of time looking for one item, because the time that you would spend looking for one item could have been used to find 4 other items in your next zone. Again, this is a more nuanced topic, but here are a couple rules of thumb that you can follow. First, if you can get a missing item in one of your next zones, then you should leave. So here, I've just finished looting archer range and I'm missing a hat. But because I know my build well, I know that in school I can also get a hat. So at this point, there's no longer any reason for me to be staying in archer range. And I might as well just leave since I'm probably going to find it in school anyways. Second, if you're at the exit of a zone and you've looted all the nearby boxes, then that means that you need to waste a lot of time backtracking just for those items. It's rarely ever worth it to backtrack for one item early on in the game. So in this example, I'm missing 2 items that I need from forest, but as you can see, I've already looted all the boxes all the way up to here. At this point, even if I'm missing 2 items, I don't think it'd be worth it to backtrack all the way here because it'd take way too much time for me to do that. Third, if you're only missing the components for your accessory and it would waste time to go look, then I would leave. This is because your accessory can wait. They tend to give fewer stats compared to your other gear slots. And also, accessories are fairly easy to craft, so you could ditch your safe plan accessory and just craft another one along the way. Number 5. Looting after your third zone. As I said before, your first couple of zones are going to be very dense with loot. But once you're entering your 4th and 5th zones, items are going to be less scarce since they've already been looted. In this scenario, you need to make sure that you're looting the less popular areas in your zones. It's safe to assume that several people would have already checked these hotspot areas, meaning that there isn't a high chance of you finding your items if you search here. So I put some thought into it and I'm gonna show you guys both the popular and the unpopular looting areas because again, if you know the popular areas, then you know where to avoid later on in the game. And also you're gonna start to notice patterns that bigger zones tend to be more spread out in terms of loot, and it's a lot easier to find these unpopular areas, whereas smaller zones like we'll see hospital and temple, everything tends to be a bit more compact. And then there's also the fact that not all areas were made the same in terms of loot density. Some are definitely better than others. I think archer range is one of the most even areas that I've seen so far. So for factory, people generally tend to spawn in this middle area. I think the common pathing is to either just be somewhere in this main building or somewhere on this side. I think as you're getting towards this main road up here, this is definitely the unpopular spaces or unpopular spots factory. Same with this side right here. So for dock, you could definitely see the center area as the most popular, just because people tend to spawn towards the center of zones. So it's very common for them to loot these crates up here. These crates down here, a little bit less popular, but still popular overall. Same with a couple of these crates up here, but as you're starting to branch towards this side, especially these boxes, very unpopular. For this building right here, not as popular as the center, but still pretty popular. So for Uptown, people tend to spawn right along this back wall and in the center building, and obviously this is the most popular looting spot. I'd say for where I would go, I would tend to loot up here if I'm late to the zone. Same with this alley right here and these couple of boxes up here. Because again, it's just far away from where people spawn and you just have a higher chance of finding your items. Beach is a fairly easy to understand zone. You can see it as anything along this back wall is probably going to be looted later on in the game, because it's probably one of the most efficient ways to walk through beach. You just walk all the way down and you loot as you go while you're walking towards the other zone. So it's really common for it to be looted. But if you look at this road up here, people don't tend to loot these areas as much. Same with these boxes down towards kind of the middle, and with these boxes right here. Hotel is one of those smaller zones, so everything is kind of compact. So for this one, definitely this main center area is pretty popular, and this main center building right next to the teleporter. I think you'd find your best luck searching areas like this, because it's kind of off into a corner. Same with, you know, maybe these boxes right here. You could loot these boxes, because again, it's just a little bit away from the middle where people normally spawn. So as I said, archery range is probably one of the best zones in terms of how evenly loot is spread. I think people tend to spawn around this middle area, and they'll come loot this corner up here. They may loot this corner down here. Even then, you still have these boxes along here. You have this pathway that leads into alley. People tend to not loot them. Same with these boxes down here. Alley is a pretty big zone, so here you have kind of a lot of leeway, but definitely this building next to the teleporter is commonly looted. People also tend to spawn next to these two buildings. But then for unpopular zones, you have the entrance into avenue right here. There's a couple boxes you can loot along this back wall, or this alleyway, you like to call it. People generally tend to not loot these areas as much, just because they're not as efficient as looting the top parts. Same with these boxes down here, because they're kind of far off into a corner. The temple is one of these smaller maps, so everything is kind of close together. Sadly, the areas near the teleporters tend to be looted. Same with these center areas. It's really common for people to spawn here. I'd say your best luck is looting down here, because these boxes tend to be left alone. Same with anything kind of on this right side, just because it's pretty scarce in terms of just the density of boxes. It's a stark comparison. So hospital is another one of these smaller areas. Anything in this main center building is probably going to be looted. Same with the teleporter building. I'd say on the left side of the teleporter building, it's definitely more popular than on the right side, because the right side is only like a couple boxes. Something along these walls right here, you probably have good luck. This main building down here, not as popular as the two other center buildings, but still fairly popular. Again, it is a small zone, so you don't have too many options. For cemetery, people tend to spawn around the center building. They'll walk up through these boxes right here. They'll go along this wall right here. These are pretty popular. But as for this side of cemetery, the left side, it's not as popular, just because everything is kind of far apart in terms of the loot boxes. The chapel is a pretty good zone in terms of loot distribution, because everything is kind of even. You have your center building, which will probably be looted. People really like to also walk down across this wall where there's the water spawn. Same with this building where you have the statue, which I think turns into a Christmas tree, but we'll see. This main building right here, I wouldn't say is too popular, but definitely when you're getting along these back walls as you're entering into forest, I'd say these ones aren't looted as much. So forest is a bigger zone that has a lot of entrances. So forest, you can't really go wrong, but just know people will probably spawn towards just the middle of the map. But anywhere from this building right here to one of these corners, one of these sides, same with these entrances, there's a box right here, and even along this wall. Forest, again, it's so big, you can't really go wrong. Now school, as long as you loot anywhere other than this main building right here and this bottom building right here, then you should be fine, because you have a couple boxes there. You have a box right here. These two boxes right here aren't that as popular. And if you want, you have a car. But again, school is really small, really compact, so things are pretty much going to be gone. For avenue, anywhere in this center building, and then the teleporter building is definitely the popular spots. When you're getting along to, I guess, this corner wall right here, it's not as popular, just because things aren't as close together. Along this back wall here, and you have these loot boxes right here, this is a little bit less popular. And you have these two cars right here that no one really ever loots if they spawn in avenue. As for pond, it is a bigger area, but definitely this center area where the two bears spawn is really popular. People tend to spawn around here. I think either here, some people may spawn towards this side, and some people may spawn on the bridge. But for the most part, center area is the most popular. This upper little corridor, I'd say, isn't looted as much. These boxes right here along these walls aren't looted as much. I also really like walking across the bridge because, again, I feel like it's not the most popular spot in Pond. Keep in mind that I'm not saying that it's impossible to find your items if you do search some of these more popular areas. Just later on in the game, I think your best chances are searching these unpopular boxes. Number 6. Deviating from your save plan. What do you do if you're missing an item and you won't get it in one of your next zones? This is when you need to know some zones outside of your save plan that contain items that you might be missing. These zones need to be fairly close to your original routing so that you don't waste time pathing through them. For example, my first zone is dock and my second zone is cemetery. I wasn't able to find a lighter in dock, so I'm going to make sure that I walk through factory and check the boxes along the way for lighters. This would be less efficient than pathing through chapel, which is a more direct route, but since factory is fairly close to cemetery, I would only lose out on a couple of seconds, so it's still worth it. Plus, I'm likely to find some of the other items that I might need. Number 7. Item upgrades. You should be trying to craft the components for potential item upgrades while you path. This does require you to memorize the recipes of the components outside of your save plan, because your save plan only has so many gear slots. However, it's still something that's worth it because it'll save you some time later on. Obviously, this really depends on how much inventory space that your build allows, and it also depends on how easy it is to craft the components for your item upgrades. So for my Adriana build, I know that in my second and third zones, I can pick up the components for potential item upgrades. In this specific instance, I know I'm able to pick up running shoes and an iron ball in archery range. That way I can craft my Heelys, and I can also pick up a monk's robe there as well. And when I go down to school, I'll be able to pick up a bandage, and using the monk's robe and the bandage, I'll be able to craft a patch robe. And as you guys can see here, if I do manage to get a VF blood sample, I'll be able to craft my Queen of Hearts armor, and if I do manage to get a force core, I'll be able to craft my boots of Hermes. Again, this is kind of a luxury, and not all builds will allow for something like this, but you can at least grab 1 or 2 components that you need, if your inventory space allows it. Now let's look at some of the micro decisions that we can make. For this lecture, micro will mean polishing our looting mechanics. Here are some techniques that experienced players will use to decrease their loot times. Number 1. Make sure you try and craft while searching boxes. This can shave off a couple seconds off your loot time, because the time you spend crafting is time that you can spend to search the box and select the items that you need. So here I have items to craft, but instead of crafting out in the open like this, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be searching boxes while I craft so that I can save just the smallest amount of time. It may not seem very big, but trust me, it makes a big difference in the long run. Number 2. I don't really know the formal name of this technique, but I've just been calling it the Korean tech. But if you guys have a better name, let me know in the comments. When you're looting boxes at the start of the game, you should just pick up every item in the box as quick as you can. And then while you're walking to the next box, sort through your inventory and drop the items that you don't need. This is really only useful at the start of the game, because later on you'll spend more time sorting through your inventory than actually looting, but it will save you a bit of time early on. This technique is a bit difficult to get used to, but there really isn't a downside to using this technique. So when I spawn in, instead of going up to a box, then selecting only the items I need, I'm just going to skip all of that and just select everything right off the bat, just in an attempt to go as fast as possible. Then I'm going to slowly try and drop items from my inventory while I walk. So here's a good example. When I'm walking to this next box, now's the time where I'll be dropping items that I don't really care about, and then I loot the next box. Again, you can really only use it at the start of the game, because your inventory fills up fast with a lot of junk, and you do need time to like process it. So it's completely understandable if this isn't the most fun mechanic, but it can save you just a little bit of time, and I think the small things add up really quickly in this game, so I think it's worth it. Number 3, you want to make sure that you know how to properly manage your inventory. Similar to the last technique, you should be sorting through your inventory while you're moving in between zones, and making sure that you drop any unnecessary items. You should also know which items that you can craft that will clear up inventory space. Lastly, you should make sure that you only harvest materials like leather and branches when you can craft something with them. In terms of build completion, it's when you combine a lot of these macro and micro choices that you can actually start to complete your builds more quickly and consistently. Overall, improving your loot time is still something that relies on experience. You won't be able to decrease your loot times if you don't practice doing some of these things. My suggestion is to focus on one macro decision and one micro decision, and try and apply them when you play. Once you get more comfortable with them, then pick another 2 topics. I assure you that if you start applying some of these things to your gameplay, you will see improvement to your build times and your build consistency. Make sure to let me know if I missed any points or if there's something that you don't agree with. Thanks for attending this lecture. Next class we'll be talking about how to make your own build, so make sure you aren't late. Class dismissed.